All right, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for our webinar series. Today we will be covering FarmQA Fundamentals, Getting Your Org in Order is what we titled this one. And my name is Ben Munson. I've been with FarmQA since 2015, and I'm a senior technology specialist, but I help on the support and sales side for the company. The goal for today was to walk through, as it sounds, some of the basics of what we offer at FarmQA. And the goal I have for this is that new customers or people who are just looking to start with FarmQA can find value from what we're showing, but also I'm going to attempt to help existing customers talk through how you can get things set up and edited for the new season if any changes are needed. And so those will be really the two core pillars of what we're covering. But as far as step by step, we're going to actually go through the process of creating an account, walking through creating grower trees, adding crops and varieties along with users, and then we'll talk through the duplication and editing of growing seasons. And as I'm doing all this, I'll talk through both the scenario of starting from scratch, but also editing if you are an existing customer. So with that, as usual, I want to spend most of my time in a live web demo of the product, and so we will be doing that now. And what I'm showing here is what we call FarmQA Controller. And this is our web-based platform. And think of controller as really the brains on the FarmQA side. We do have the mobile application for in-field data capture, but the controller or the web platform is more of where the account setup type work is going to happen. So really quick, we're going to step through the process of creating an account from scratch, just so that new users are going to know really some of the first steps to take. With that, on our application or the web view, you can come to farmqa.com and click the Get Started tab on the top right-hand corner. And that would bring you into a window where you can enter some of your basic information as far as your name, email, and an optional phone number. From there, we will email over an onboarding code, and that will allow you it will email you code that you can enter to continue on the process of creating a FarmQA account. From here, you can name your organization, whatever your company name is, along with selecting your units. From here, we have your profile type, and really this is just serving up what demo data we're going to give you once you create your account. It has no further bearing beyond that, so don't get overwhelmed or nervous about what you select here. And then from this screen, this is where you have the opportunity to start selecting what crops that you are working with. And you can do that through scrolling through the list and selecting, or you can search as well if you want to find a specific crop. And then you can click next, enter your password, and then that would allow you to create your FarmQA account. So I realize for a majority of the people on this call, that's already been done. So what you would be left with at that state is some demo data. So as I talked about, if you are a retailer versus an independent agronomist, we're going to give you slightly different demo data that you will start out with within your account. But essentially, we want to give you a few basic building blocks to understand what we have to offer in the software platform. So you'd see several fields within the bottom right, the legend breaking down the crops that you have planted, the number of acres. You would get a growing season, which has the demo data, and a 2022 season for any changes you want to make that would be specific or get moved forward as you proceed with a FarmQA account. So note that if you add fields, do it within the 2022 season opposed to the 2022 demo data. Additionally, within here, you have the option to see your different organizational units. So you can see we have 3 pre-created. You can jump between those to filter data down. And then on the left-hand side is where you see our main pane for navigation. And within the product, we've got a field list view. We have the ability to import soil data, which you can do that from the soil tab, along with see those results. The meat and potato here of the product would be the scouting reports, and we give you a table view to see that data. And what you're experiencing with this demo data set is a significant number of reports, which you can view and thumb through to get a taste of what the reporting could look like for you as a new user. The same comment would go for the advice. So these would be chemical recommendations, which you can see across all fields in a table view. Jump in to see the actual recommendation. and then take action as far as exporting out or marking this as a completed event. Additionally, we have a few other things that we'll get into, such as analytics, where you can take a step back and see what's going on holistically across your data set. And then settings is where you would do a lot of the work that we're going to talk about today. So this would be things like adding a crop list, adding new users, adjusting your growing seasons. And so that would all be within the setting tab. And what we'll do for the next step here is, let's say that you have created a FarmQA account and you want to take the next step of entering in some of your own data. And like our webinar says, kind of starting with the fundamentals of what we can offer. I would recommend removing your demo data. So if you click that tab in the top right, that will delete out all of the demo fields, scouting reports, recommendations that I just briefly showed. And you would end up with essentially a blank FarmQA account, which you can now make your own. A few things that I would walk through here is, as I mentioned, I would recommend starting out in settings. And within here, let me clear out some of the data that I was practicing with. You would have a blank account where within this you would have the crops that you would have onboarded with. So the ones that you selected from that initial list would be visible. But as far as a first step I would recommend taking when getting into a FarmQA account would be to add crops. And for existing users, this would apply for if you want to add new crops for this season or new varieties. And what you do is within, as you can see, we're in settings, the crop tab. On the bottom right-hand corner, this is where you have the opportunity to add a new crop. So let's say you wanted to add something like sunflowers, you could type that in as a crop name. One thing to note is that you can also, because we allow you to put in a name and select the crop, you could put something in here for, if you wanted corn that was maybe Roundup ready, that could actually be your crop name, or you could just leave it as corn. But my point being is that on the second screen, you can then select one of what we call our master crops. The value of doing it in this way is that you could then have different categories for your different crop traits, so that those could be visualized differently in the map view, and it could also be tracked on the reports that might go to your end grower. So keep that in mind as you give it a name, is that can differ from the master crop and allow you to have different categories. So you can see what that would look like. We do support perennial crops, and what this would do is if you did turn this on, it would allow you to have a field that persists across growing seasons. So that's the checkbox that we provide there. We do require that you select a default scouting template for the new crops that you're creating. If you don't see the one you're looking for, so in my case, I added a new corn crop, but I'm going to select corn as my template. If you didn't see that, there will always be a general template available, and that is something that I would recommend selecting at this stage. You could add the crop, and then later on you can edit that if you end up creating a scouting specific template for a new crop that you just added. So, sorry about that. I'm going to select corn. On this next view, you can select what color you want to get that fill color to when visualizing this corn Roundup Ready crop on the map view. You can key in a GDU base temp along with putting in notes. But as I add that, you can see that is now available in my list, and you can see how that would differ from my previous corn, my corn crop that was in the system. With any of the crops, you can edit. So on the right-hand side, if you hover over any of the crops, you can see the pencil icon appears, and this is where you could say, if you want to put conventional, if I could spell conventional, and then as you can see here, two different categories that are more of a traditional setup in an account. Another thing to point out, that in the same process of adding new crops, you can also add varieties, which is a new 2022 feature for FarmQA. This is done on the right-hand side by clicking the plus button, and this would allow you to then key in a variety name. So if you want to put in a variety, you'd key that in, and in the notes, you could put in maturity dates, you could put in days to black layer or GDUs to black layer, things like that, which would would get tracked and be visible within this list. Another thing to note is that you can give variety specific templates. So if you went to the level of creating a scouting template that may be unique for a certain variety, this is where you could differ from using the default and select that template. Same thing would go for crop color, is that you can use that color for corn, or we could give this variety a unique color within this view by unchecking that and again straying from the default. As you can see that now populates underneath that conventional corn, and you can see how we could add to that list if we want to put in another variety. You can see what that would look like. So I would recommend starting there with building out your crop and variety list. And if you're an existing customer, you can edit in that way as well for adding varieties or new crops. The next thing that we'll talk through is your organizational tree. So in this count, it's a freshly created account, and a few things that I would do next is you can see on the left-hand side, I have just the name of my company, if you will. But what I want to do next is using this plus button on the bottom left. This is where I have the option to add a new farm or a grower. In my case, I'm going to add a new grower. We're going to call it Munson Farms. And I'm going to build out several of these so you can see what this looks like. So we'll say Old McDonald. And then we'll do a third one, and we'll just call this FarmQA. So this would be a scenario where you may have 3 growers that you're working with, and you can see how there's no limit to this list. You could build this out to have as many branches in this tree as you'd like. But then within any one of these branches, you can see how you could edit the name if you need be. So this goes for existing customers who may need to, if there's a different change of hands or they edit in a name, you could then come in here and call this, let's just say this one became Bramble Farms. That is a real-time edit we just made, and that folder, if you will, just got renamed to that. Now, one thing that might happen is if you want to add a sub-farm, let's say underneath Munson Farms, they have an east and west division. That is where I'd recommend clicking on Munson Farms so you can see how that's highlighted in blue, but then you could add sub-units to that. So we'll just call this east, and now that is a sub-entry within that farm. And for the sake of building this out, I'm going to put a second farm in there so you can see what that would look like. Now, as far as best practices go, I would recommend if you have a lot of growers that just have a single farm, let's just say Old McDonald had a home farm, I wouldn't recommend building out subfolders if it's just a single farm. Where it makes sense in our system to do this is like it shows here in this case where there are 2 or more subfarms. The reason being is that on our reports, we will always show the lowest branch in the tree or the lowest folder. So in this case, even though Old McDonald owns this farm, we're going to show home on that report as the kind of the organizational level. And then additionally, the value comes in here where if you want to filter scouting reports, recommendations, fields, you can do that based on this east versus west division. Whereas if it's just a single division, there's no added benefit for filtering because it's going to give you the same view whether you click Old McDonald or Home Farm. So that's just a recommendation from my side. One thing I would say is if you do have subfolders and you find you don't want that or it adds clutter, that is what this trash can is for. So you can delete that. And that is just deleting that node. So you can see Old McDonald is still there in the tree, but just missing that or removed that sub farm. Now, another thing to note is during the process or even after the fact, if a particular farm moves hands or you made a mistake while creating this, let's say you had a farm that you added underneath Munson Farms, but you didn't want that there. We do allow you to reparent that. And so that's what this picker is right here, is that we could now say, maybe this was supposed to belong to Bramble Farms. We can move that over, and now that farm just got moved. So there's a lot of flexibility here in how you create these trees, but this would be a way you can edit it, you can add, you can create from scratch. That, again, like I said, that would be a second step that I would take even before adding fields to your FarmQA account. Now, a couple things to note is that you can give colors, unique colors per farm, so that on the map you can color code to that organizational level. So that's what you're seeing when I say use custom colors, is I'm granting a unique color per each one of these folders, if you will. and I'll show you in a minute what that would look like on the map. So that is one other function you can do when creating these organizational trees. Now, the third thing I would recommend is that I would have you look through underneath organization. If you click on your very top level, you get a unique view as far as setting options. And I would look through these to make sure that the account is set up the way you want it to function. And so as we do that, we look through the first section of general information. You can actually edit your company name here. So if you wanted this to be something unique, you could call this, whatever you wanted in here, and that would then your account would get renamed. The other thing to note is that when we generate reports or PDFs, you can have your own custom logo on that included in a base price of our product. To do that, you would come into where my mouse is now, click the edit icon, and this allows you to drag and drop in a logo, or you can search your file structure. In my case, I've got a PNG of my logo, which I'll just drag and drop into that box. And now you can see that that will now flow through to the PDFs when we generate reports. A couple things to note for even existing customers is an option here is to toggle on township section overlays. By default, that is actually off simply because we don't know where people are onboarding from. We do have available township section lines for a majority of the states, but not all states have them available publicly. And so that is why we have them off. But I would turn that on if you're interested in that, and then see if the boundaries are display or overlay in your region. Additionally, we did add a new feature for any existing customers on here, is that we can now enable detailed field labels on the map when zoomed in. And what that means is if you have a field, let's just call it home farm or home field, if you zoom in far enough, it will then show under parentheses what's planted there in the variety. And I will demonstrate that one shortly. But that is an option you can toggle on. Below here, if you look back at my videos on the scouting and recommendations, we go into the details of what these would look like, but I would just recommend that you would go back and watch those videos or review a support document if you're curious what these options would be. The main ones would just be in that general tab when it comes to setting up your initial account. Now, the next thing we'll talk through is how do we add field boundaries, or for existing users, how do you edit and what options do we have available to you? So the reason I explained creating this grower tree first, or editing it so that it's in a proper state for a new season, is that when we go to add new fields, you can now select from this folder structure when placing fields. For example, if we want to add a new field, I will come down to the bottom right and click the plus button. Now on the left-hand screen, this is the interface I can use for keying in details of that field. On the top, I have some draw tools where I could manually outline a field using a polygon or circle. But what I'll do in this case is that we do support the upload of boundaries. And so if you have the fields in a KML or a shapefile that are individual files, you can drag and drop them into the left-hand pane, which will then populate that shape as seen here. You can then move the shape like I'm doing, or you can edit the vertices individually. But then on the left-hand side, this is where we want to place the field in the proper organizational structure, give it a name. You can assign a crop from this window for the selected growing season, and then click Save. This will allow you to, it'll leave you in the same state where the same organization is selected, so that if you want to quickly drop additional fields, you can be doing that by just clicking the Save button and dropping in new shapefiles or KMLs each time. We do have a bulk upload process that has to go through FarmQA support, so send that to support@farmqa.com if you're looking to get those boundaries uploaded into your demo account. So as seen here, I've just uploaded 3 boundaries into the Bramble farm, and so you can see that is delineated here, and as I go to Munson farms, those will go away. Into Bramble farms, those will appear. So that is some of the basics. Now talking through editing boundaries. So for example, if in a new season, this field 23 needs to get adjusted, we can first of all, make sure we are in that new season of 2022. And then what options we provide to you as a user is that you can edit the field. From this view, you can click on the field, which displays the vertices. And this is where you can adjust the field to say maybe you cut out that corner. You could just adjust a single vertice and save that, and it would take those changes. If it was a scenario where perhaps the field needs to get split, you can do that in the view as well. So if you assign a crop, that will then take that field and push it into 2022. But that makes, let me get into account that's got this set up. So we do have this in a, we call a feature flag, so that you have to kind of go into split field mode. So you can see what that would look like if I wanted to split this particular field. I will click on that. Underneath the more, so the dot, 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 you'll see a split tool option. And if I click on that, it will automatically split my field. From here, what you can do is you can rename this if you want it to be, north versus south. But then you could also, if the split didn't happen where you wanted it to, that's where you can manipulate the vertices to break that into a shape that you'd want to see in a given year. And the same thing would go for the, let's say the west shape in my case, where I could move these vertices around to have that represent the split. So you can see that would be the visualization now for the 2022 season. But if I go back into 2021 or 2020, you can see what that would look like of just the other shape. So talking through a few other things you can do here, you can add users. So that's a big component of getting an account set up or adjusting your account. And you would do that through really a two-step process here. And the first step would be if I come into, we'll stay in this account, to users, you can see I have no users currently in my account. So what I would want to do is I'll add a user, and let's just say I'm going to call this, we'll just say ben@gmail.com. So you do need an email, a name, and a password. And you can see the requirements here as far as what the password would be. And then you can select a role. So this is going to be critical for what the user can do once they log in. And talking through these roles, so an enterprise admin, that one's full access, and really one person per account should have that role. Below that, agronomist is still full function. They just can't do certain admin level functions, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll just say that is full function. Then we break it down into crop scout. This is going to be similar to what it sounds. If you hire interns that are just checking fields and submitting scouting data, that is ideal solution for them. The grower option would be if you have growers that want to enter their own information into the platform, things like their own plant dates, what varieties they put in fields, if they want to mark recommendations as completed, the grower role is suited for them. If you hire on staff that they're not going to write recommendations, but they need to have slightly elevated access beyond a crop scout, that's what we elevated, or that a standard user is for, is it's a slightly more access than crop scout, but slightly less than agronomist. Finally, there's the viewer. A majority of people, if you just want to dip your toes in the program, you can be a viewer for free, and that would be the role to set for that user. And then the other key piece here is that you select within that organizational tree you've created, you select what branch they should get access to see data for. And so if we select that, that would allow them to see just Bramble Ranch in this case. Then if we save that user, looks like I've got some issues with my demo data, but that would then create users. And if I jump back over here, you would see you would build out a user list like I have on the left-hand side. Then at any given point in time, you can see within the organization tab, if you want to see more holistically who has access at any node in your tree, you can click on the security tab, and this would break down by access level who all has access to see Minnesota farms in my case, and at what access level they have the rights to do so. So the process happens in the user tab, but then in organization, this is where you can see who has access to what. So that is the process of adding users. And as far as what they can do, we do have support docs walking through that process so that you can more familiarize yourself with those roles I quickly walked through. Now, a very common question we get is existing customers going into a new season, or perhaps new customers that want to backfill historic seasons. How do you go about doing that? So to answer that question, we will be within the settings and the growing season tab. And this is where on the left-hand side, you see all the seasons I have in my demo account. But what I will do in this instance is that I have 2021 is a season that, let's say I want to duplicate this and create a 2023 season. We'll talk through that scenario. And the reason you might want to do this, so if I go to the plus button in the bottom left, you can see I have a duplicate growing season option and a new growing season option. Briefly, the duplicate will take all the crop assignments and push them into a new season. The second option here, it says new growing season, that will create the season without any crop assignments. So that's the difference in the breakdown. And a use case here might be if you've got a corn soybean rotation where it's every 2 years, that might be a good opportunity to select. And when I say select, make sure 2021 is highlighted in blue, duplicate that season, and then call it 2023. And then you would likely have a lot of the correct crop assignments, given that 2-year rotation would already be done for you. Now, and after I do that, I can rename it to 2023, give it a state. Active would mean you want to be able to see it in the mobile app or not, essentially. And then you can save it in the top right-hand corner. The second option of a new season, you could select any season on the left-hand side to do this because it doesn't really matter, because when you create a new season, it's not taking the assignments. And so you could just call this, I'll go back and do 2015. So you can create this, and then I would make this a archive season if you're trying to backfill data. So that would be the process of getting set up and have seasons ready for the new year. But then what that would allow me to do is that within any given year or season, you can see that those are now years 2015 and 2023 are selectable. If I click on 2023, you can see it has assignments already because I duplicated, and the 2015 would not have assignments because I started from a new season. So that would be the experience to go through on creating the growing season itself. From here, what I would talk through is I did mention how you can color the map by organization, so I will show that quickly. And the way you do that is from this map, if on the left-hand side, as you bring or slide out the map details, in this view, you have the option to color the fields based on 3 different parameters. The first and default is by the crop assignment, so your corn, soybeans, wheat in my case. But then additionally, we have the color by variety, and this would allow you to, if you gave those varieties a unique color, you could see those colors displayed instead of the master crop colors. And the legend updates on that as well. So you could then search down to say, show me where my cornfields are, and it's showing that broken down by variety using this legend. And then, as I talked about, when creating those organizational levels, we had the option to give organizations a unique color. And if you do that, that would allow you to get to a view similar to this, where if we look at my tree, I've got the high-level unit breakdowns of Minnesota farm versus North Dakota farm, and you'd be able to see that visually where those farms operate, along with an acreage breakdown and a field breakdown for each one of those units. So that would be how that function works when setting up the organizational tree and wondering what those color codes do. This is going to be really kind of the end result of what you can do with that. I also mentioned that while creating or going through those settings for new count, I talked about toggling on detailed labels, and that is a new function. So for existing FarmQA customers, what that will do for you is, as you notice, the field name, in my case, it's a lot of numeric names, will display by default. But as we zoom in here, what's new is the ability for that secondary label to appear when you are zoomed in. So as I do this, you can see the crop and the variety now appear underneath that field name, and so that you can see what's planted without actually having to click into the field itself. And that is actually available on the mobile app as well. So as you drive throughout an operation, you'll be able to see that breakdown from the mobile application with those secondary labels. So that is a function for existing customers, where you could turn that on again within the settings, organization tab, and then it's the toggle option I have highlighted here for enabled detailed field labels on the map when zoomed in. So that is something to be aware of when you are adjusting or looking at your account for the 2022 season. So that, again, is, I would call that kind of the basics of FarmQA, adjusting your organizational tree, making sure your crop variety lists are ready for the year, making sure you have your growing seasons in place. And then additionally, user additions, you can add users, edit users. One thing I didn't talk about is, let's say you had maybe crop scouts that were done for, maybe they're seasonal. You could delete those users out as a trash can on this user tab, and that would allow you to remove a user, and then you could turn around and replace their seat with by adding a user and selecting the same role that you had assigned to a user. Another thing that is visible here is that you can give a user access. Perhaps you have more of a complex tree here, where maybe you've got, you know, a father and son, and they might have 3 different farms, and it's all through joint ventures. You can actually grant one user access to multiple branches, so that they could be logging in and seeing maybe 3 of your 60 farms. They could have access to do that. So that was relevant here, just because you can see that this user has access to multiple organizations in my particular account. So we do support that. There's that. I guess I think I'll probably leave it at that for this particular webinar. We just wanted to walk through some of the basic setup type stuff to make sure people are comfortable with this, certainly on the edit side for existing customers, and if you're new to the system, what type of things you might want to do in a certain order to make sure that things are up and running properly for you. So with that said, we do have some upcoming webinars that we are excited about. The next one, we're going to be talking about what's new in FarmQA, and we have actually been adding a significant number of new functions even since the last time I did a webinar on our new features. And so I would really hope that you guys can tune in for that one as well. Just a sneak peek on that, we did add the ability to start a scouting report from last week's record. So essentially copy and paste the data that you had in a previous report, hopefully being more efficient and allowing you to just adjust the changes in a report. We did have pricing added to recommendations, so now you can essentially get an automatic cost per product and per field when writing recommendations. And we've got a few other things in there on the soil sampling front, where data can now snap down into particular pins or sampling location pins, and much more. But those are some of the highlights, just to tease that out. But tune in, that's Tuesday, April 5th. You can watch all of our previous webinars on using the link here, and it's also on our YouTube channel by searching FarmQA. And then as always, we've got our support topics. Some that might relate to this webinar would be looking at the admin instructions, and that's going to allow you to read through, get step-by-step instructions on how to do a lot of the things that I talked about today. But we do want to open this up for Q&A. That's going to allow you guys to ask any questions you want. I know this topic was on more of the fundamentals, but feel free to ask any question on functionality we offer, and I would be happy to walk through it with you. So fire away, and do so in the chat of Microsoft Teams, and I will be watching that on my end for any comments or questions that come through. So with that said, if there's no questions, thank you for joining. We hope you tune in for the webinar on the 5th. And other than that, I'll be looking for questions.